Do 4.1, Part C. We're given the function f of x is equal to the square root of x plus 1. We're asked to graph this function for the first step, so let's go ahead and start that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pick some points. Okay, if we look inside the radical, we pretty much know, since we're only dealing with real numbers, that we have to plug in a number that must be greater than -1. So what that tells us is the domain of this function is -1 to infinity. Okay, so we're going to start with -1 as our first point. If I go ahead and plug it into my function, I get -1 plus 1, which gives me 0. Another point I'm going to pick is 0. The square root of 0 plus 1 is 1. So my second order pair is 1. My third point I'm going to pick is 3. The square root of 3 plus 1 is equal to the square root of 4, which is equal to 2. And then my last point I'm going to pick is 8. The square root of 8 plus 1 is equal to the square root of 9, which is 3. Okay, so let's go ahead and plot this now. The first point is -1, 0. The next point is 0, 1. Then we have 3, 2. And then 8, 3. Okay, so there's f of x. While we're here, let's go ahead and talk about the range of this function. By looking at the graph, we can tell that the range is going to be 0 to infinity. Okay, now when we find the inverse, these two should be switched around. So let's go ahead and finish up step 1 before we go to step 2 and find the inverse. Step 1 says to sketch the graph. We've done that. And then determine whether it's 1 to 1. By the horizontal line test, we can tell it's 1 to 1. So now let's start step 2. Step 2 says if it is 1 to 1, go ahead and find the formula. So we're going to follow the methods up here. The first thing I do is I replace f of x with y. Okay, and then I interchange x and y. Then I solve for y, so I'm going to square each side first. And I get y is equal to x squared minus 1. Finally, the last step we want to do is replace f of x with y. I'm sorry, let me say it again. We want to replace y with f inverse of x. So f inverse of x is equal to x squared minus 1, which is a parabola. We know that's not 1 to 1. So we have to include the domain of this function. The domain of the inverse function will be the same thing as the range of the original function. So I'm going to say the domain is 0 to infinity. So in other words, I want to include x must be greater than or equal to 0 into this function. So that is 1 to 1. Let's go ahead and find the range also. The range should be the domain of the original function, which is -1 to infinity. Okay, so we've actually already completed part 3 now. Now let's go ahead and graph the inverse. Okay, by the definition of inverses, we should be able to switch these ordered pairs and they should work. So let's go ahead and check the first one. If I plug in 0, I get 0 squared minus 1 is equal to -1. So that's correct. Let's go ahead and switch the rest of the other pairs. The other one, instead of 0, 1, I'm going to put 1, 0. Instead of 3, 2, I'm going to put 2, 3. Instead of 8, 3, I'm going to have 3, 8. So let's go ahead and plot these points now. So the first point is 0, -1. Next point is 1, 0. The next point is 2, 3. And the last point that we have listed there is 3, 8. Okay, so there's the graph of f inverse of x. As you can tell with all inverses, they should be symmetric with respect to the line y is equal to x, which is this line right here. And we can tell that it is. Okay, so that completes part C of this worksheet.